Hello and welcome to the Davenport Public Library Chapter a Day program. My name is Angie, or Miss Angie as my Storytime kids call me, or Nonna as my very favorite people call me, or Nonna Angie. Today we are going to continue reading The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane. That's by Kate DeCamillo. It's illustrated by Bagram Iba Tulane, and it's published by Candlewick Press, who have given us permission to read this book in this program. Now, I just watched an interview with Bagram Iba Tulane, and I found it fascinating. The way that he got ready to do all the illustrations in the book was to make a sculpture of the rabbit's head so that he could turn it around and look at it from all the different positions so that he could get an accurate drawing no matter what Edward was doing. Here's a picture on the back of the book. Can you see that? Okay. So you can see it's quite detailed. The artwork in this book is fantastic, as is the writing. So in chapter 1, we were introduced to Edward. We found out that he is a rabbit. He's made of china, so he's very delicate. He loves to dress. He loves to get himself dressed up fancy. He's kind of a persnickety rabbit. He lives in a household with Abilene, who owns him. She's a 10-year-old girl, and her parents. And he's very well loved. Abilene loves Edward very much. So with that, we're going to go ahead and move on to chapter 2. Here is the photograph. You can see that's Edward and what I assume is the back of Abilene's head. And in this manner, Edward's days passed one into the other. Nothing remarkable happened. Oh, there was the occasional small domestic drama. Once, when Abilene was at school, the neighbor's dog, a male brindled boxer, inexplicably named Rosie, came into the house uninvited and unannounced and lifted his leg on the dining room table, spraying the white tablecloth with urine. He then trotted over and sniffed Edward, and before Edward even had time to consider the implications of being sniffed by a dog, he was in Rosie's mouth, and Rosie was shaking him back and forth vigorously, growling and drooling. Fortunately, Abilene's mother walked past the dining room and witnessed Edward's suffering. "Drop it," she shouted to Rosie, and Rosie, surprised into obedience, did just as he was told. Edward's silk suit was stained with drool, and his head ached for several days afterwards. But it was his ego that had suffered the most damage. Abilene's mother had referred to him as it, and she was more outraged at the dog urine on her tablecloth than she was about the indignities that Edward had suffered at the jaws of Rosie. There's the boxer, and Edward. And then there was the time that a maid, new to the Tulane household and eager to impress her employers with her diligence, came upon Edward sitting on his chair in the dining room. "What's this bunny doing here?" she said aloud. Edward did not care at all for the word bunny. He found it derogatory to the extreme. The maid bent over him and looked into his eyes. "Humph," she said. She stood back up. She put her hands on her hips. "I reckon you're just like every other thing in this house. Something needing to be cleaned and dusted." And so, the maid vacuumed Edward Tulane. She sucked each of his long ears up into the vacuum cleaner hose, and she pawed his clothes, and she beat his tail. She dusted his face with brutality and efficiency, and in her zeal to clean him, she vacuumed Edward's gold pocket watch right off of his lap. The watch went into the maw of the vacuum cleaner with a distressing clank that the maid did not even seem to hear. When she was done, she put the dining room chair back at the table, and, uncertain about exactly where Edward belonged, she finally decided to shove him in among the dolls on the shelf in Abilene's bedroom. "That's right," said the maid. "There you go." She left Edward on the shelf at a most awkward, inhuman angle. His nose was actually touching his knees. And he waited there with the dolls twittering and giggling at him like a flock of demented and unfriendly birds. Until Abilene came home from school and found him missing and ran from room to room calling his name. "Edward!" she shouted. "Edward!" There was no way, of course, for him to let her know where he was. No way for him to answer her. He could only sit and wait. When Abilene found him, she held him close. So close that Edward could feel her heart beating, leaping almost out of her chest in agitation. "Edward," she said. "Oh, Edward, I love you. I never want you to be away from me." The rabbit, too, was experiencing great emotion. But it was not love. It was annoyance that he had been so mightily inconvenienced, that he had been handled by the maid as cavalierly as an inanimate object. A serving bowl, say, or a teapot. The only satisfaction to be had from the whole affair was that the new maid was dismissed immediately. Edward's pocket watch was located later, deep within the bowels of the vacuum cleaner, dented, but still in working condition. It was returned to him by Abeline's father, who presented it with a mocking bow. "Sir Edward," he said, "your timepiece, I believe." The Rosie affair and the vacuum cleaner incident, those were the great dramas of Edward's life, until the night of Abeline's 11th birthday, when, at the dinner table, as the cake was being served, a ship was mentioned. Dun dun dun. I don't know, that was pretty crazy with the dog shaking poor Edward and the maid just throwing him up on the shelf, just throwing him up as if he was any other toy. But I'm pretty worried about this ship. So we will have to see. Join us next time as we start with chapter 3 of Edward Tulane.